So thank you guys for coming out. This is the second art talk of the quarter here in the fall, and thanks for coming out on such a brisk and dark fall evening. So I just want to make a couple announcements before I get started. One is that we will be having the third art talk this quarter on November 20th, and it'll be same time, same place, and the artist Ma Lee, who is an installation and performance artist, will be here to speak in conjunction with the show that she's doing down in the Archer Gallery. And I just also want to say thank you to the Associated Students of Clark College for the generous funding that allows this program to take place, and also to the faculty in the art department for selecting such a fantastic list of speakers. So this evening, I'm pleased to be introducing Andrew Dixon, and he has had and is still having a very diverse and exciting career that ranges from professional graphic design work to being a performance artist to being an auctioneer. And I think it's probably just going to be much more fun to hear it straight from him. So please join me in welcoming Andrew Dixon.
All right, maybe I'll go a little handheld. How are y'all doing? Do we like the microphone? Is that better?
Yeah.
Hear me in the back? Thank you so much for having me and for coming out. I'm really excited. I was here, was it 8 years ago, maybe? And I'm really excited to be back. I come out a lot this way. I've got an 8-year-old who loves Sky Zone, so we do a lot of Vancouver time, he and I. So, a filmmaker, less Spielberg, more Cassavetes, an actor, like a cast member on SNL, the star of my own sitcom, an artist, like a painter or a mixed media artist, maybe even a sculptor, or even a gallery owner, with an eye towards museum curation, a rock star, specifically a drummer, but like an indie rock star, a stand-up comedian, a screenwriter, a novelist, a book cover designer, or a playwright. These were the things that I maybe wanted to be when I was in college. And spoiler alert, I'm none of those things. I dabble in a couple of those things, but I do not do any of those things for a living. None of them worked out. I'm a copywriter, so this is what I do by day. I write taglines, manifestos, TV commercials, billboard headlines for brands, which is just another way of saying companies, big ones, small ones, when I'm lucky, nonprofit ones. And then I'm a performer, and I am a storyteller, an auctioneer. I call myself a semi-professional auctioneer. I didn't go to school for it. I can get pretty fast, but not laser fast. I do a lot of host and emceeing work, and probably the reason I'm here is I also perform my own work. So I think I'm going to sprinkle a couple of these little pieces of advice or just sort of things that I learned. I think it's really important to know where you want to go. I want to do that. When I was in my 20s, my favorite question to ask people I hadn't met is, where are you going to be in 5 years? And I would sort of judge how much I wanted to hang out with them based on that answer. You know, if it was something similar to what I wanted, oh, you want to be a filmmaker too? Oh my gosh, we're going to collaborate. And if people didn't know what they wanted to do, I was like, not worth my time. So I think it's important to know where you're going. I mean, you know, very judgmental. I'll own up to it. I was very judgmental in my early 20s. But I think it's also important to kind of let opportunities present themselves. So I think when I was in college, I didn't know what a copywriter was, and I would never have considered performing. I wasn't into theater. I didn't get on stage regularly. But sort of through the course of my career, that's kind of where I ended up, and I'm really happy with both of those roles. So I think that's just, you know, a little life lesson. As you're exploring your career, these opportunities will present themselves, and hear them out. They may take you in another place, so you don't end up there, but you end up there or there, you know, sort of close to. So you may be shocked that writing TV commercials for big brands pays better than being a performer. I make a little bit of money performing. I've gotten pretty used to it. I think last year I did about 50 performances of one kind or another, so just being on stage in front of a group of people about once a week. I would like it to be more of my living, but you know, again, this is just kind of where we're at. So I'm sure you're going to hear some lectures from people who are full-time artists. I'm not. I have been in moments, I will say also that I have all the privilege, right? I am straight, white, heteronormative. I have a lot of height. I'm very tall. I've got 2 kids, a boy and a girl. I have all the privilege. I grew up educated. My parents had money. I've had all the privilege, and yet, even with all that, making a living as an artist is really hard. Has been for me. It's a lot easier to get a job as a copywriter than an artist. And I think, people who give lectures love to say, if you get one thing from this lecture, right, you gotta leave early. I think it's so important. This is something that I think artists really struggle with. I think this is a culture that does not respect artists. This is a culture that often makes fun of the idea of pursuing art. If you tell certain relatives that you're majoring in art, they're gonna say, haha, what are you gonna do for a living? What are you really gonna do? It's tough, right? But being an artist is vital. This culture, this world needs artists more so than ever. Art is really important, and we need artists. But it's really easy to get this sort of imposter syndrome, especially if you're not making a living as an artist. So I want you as creative people to remember, you don't have to be making a living to be an artist. You don't even have to be making art actively all the time. This is something I've struggled with. I went a couple years where I really wasn't making stuff. I made 2 kids, or helped, I should say. I didn't really make them, but, and I just stopped making art, and it was really hard for me to consider myself a creative person, much less an artist. And actually I have a mentee who I mentored through the Pacific Northwest College of Art graduate program, and they are fabulous performer. They are not making their living as a performer yet, and they are taking the fall off. They do a show called Toxic Masculinity that's a very emotionally draining show. It's a funny show, actually. They get men on stage sort of hugging each other and being intimate with each other. And they said, I need to take some time off, but I'm struggling with whether I can even still call myself an artist. Yes! So, I saw someone taking a picture of this. Again, this is so vitally important, especially as you leave school, as you're out there, you don't have regular crits, you don't have assignments, you gotta just keep, being an artist is a way to interact with the world and interpret it and give your sort of take on it and put your interpretations back out in the world. All right, that part of the lecture's over. The lecture part of the lecture's over. I was going to find a picture of me as a kid. I can't. They're all digital images. It's stuck on a drive somewhere. So imagine me much cuter, much younger. I grew up in a little town called Garrett Park, Maryland, DC suburbs. And no one's ever asked me, Andrew, growing up, what were your influences? I guess because I'm not a rock drummer. But I'm going to share them. I've never done this before, but I think these are the things that really affected me. Saturday Night Live, I really learned satire and how you can make fun of something and be sort of current and talk about politics without preaching. I grew up in the DC suburbs, so in high school, $5 was enough to get downtown, go to this incredible system of free museums, get a slice of pizza, come back home. So having access to that resource was pretty incredible. I did something in high school called Odyssey of the Mind. Anyone? Some people were making robots. My little crew, we were sort of putting these skits together. It was competitive and there were rules, but we were kind of writing our own material and you'd get like a prompt around the 7 wonders of the world. And I think that was where I started to collaborate and be creative with other creative people really early on. And then DC also had a really vibrant punk rock scene with bands like Fugazi, kind of the whole straight edge thing started there. So for me, that was really kind of where I got my values. When I was in high school, anytime you went to see live music, it was always a benefit. There were always card tables of petitions and political flyers, and so I think that's where I sort of got this DIY ethic to just create community, create network, and just get my work out there, no matter what. So I went to school in Connecticut, which is what I like to say to imply I went to Yale. I didn't. I went to a college called Wesleyan. And I really wanted to make my own work and not write papers about what somebody else thought about someone else's work. So I gravitated towards painting and filmmaking. My school happened to have a really good film program, and this is back when you actually shot on film. So it was hard to make movies without access to all this equipment. So I majored in film and loved it and was making little short films. So when I graduated, I moved to Portland, Oregon back in 1995 when it was so cheap. It was so very cheap, you can't even imagine. It was so cheap back then, so affordable. And I moved here, I wanted to play music and play in bands. Grunge had just happened, so you couldn't really show up in Seattle without seeming like you were jumping on the bandwagon. But Gus Van Sant was here, really making these really interesting films, and it felt small and affordable and just felt like a place that I could sort of plug in and start making stuff. So what I wanted to do was make a feature film, right? This was when kind of Sundance was new. Filmmakers like Robert Rodriguez and Kevin Smith were winning Sundance, getting deals and making movies, and I said, I want to do that. That was my, I want to go there. So I played music. This is just to date myself. These are some of the worst band names ever. I was in all of these bands. But really what I wanted to do was make this film, Good Grief. There it is, the VHS copy. You can maybe still find it at Movie Madness in Southeast Portland. And so I wanted to make a movie about high school kids because I felt, being in my young 20s at the time, that high school students were often portrayed really one-dimensionally in Hollywood. So I didn't really have the imagination to come up with a whole set of characters, so I kind of took the Peanuts gang and imagined they were in high school, getting into punk rock, but also still playing Dungeons and Dragons. And so the sort of tension was Chuck there in the bottom with the green shirt, still wanted to kind of hang out and play Dungeons and Dragons. His friends wanted to, go to rock shows and hang out and have fun. So they end up going on this kind of last hurrah treasure hunt. Chuck kind of loses his mind, and yeah, there it is. There's Good Grief in a nutshell. There's the log line. And I think somewhere during the process of making it, I realized I probably wasn't going to win Sundance and get a free picture deal. But because I was sort of plugged into making music and this sort of DIY culture happening in Portland and around the country, I ended up touring it. And so I took the film and bought a projector and took one of the actors who had a pretty popular zine, and we went on tour. We did like 50 dates and 60 nights, and we played film festivals and movie theaters, but also like record stores and punk rock basements, and we just kind of toured. And we went back with just enough money to make a little bit of money until my transmission broke. So it was a wash, but it was a lot of fun and kind of finding an audience for this film. And but I came back broke, so I had to start working as a production assistant. So I spent my kind of 20s working on movies and infomercials, commercials, kind of learning how to make movies and meeting other people interested in films. But I wanted to start to keep making films, so I just started making these little films. And the first small one I made was called Autographs.com, little extra H, extra S, and it was inspired. I was working on a job out at the Nike campus, and if you've ever been there, there's actually a parking space for every one of their sponsored athletes. And it was like, how often does Michael Jordan just roll up in his rental car? Like, isn't he getting helicoptered in? So it struck me as really ridiculous. So I said, I'm gonna get my friend who's an actor there in the sunglasses, and he's gonna go out and sort of pretend to be this autograph collector trying to get autographs for his website. And this was when the internet was kind of new. This was probably 2000, Autographs.com. And it would have been, I think, kind of a boring movie. It would have been just him kind of wandering around, not finding any celebrities getting kicked off campus. But I ended up injuring myself playing basketball the week before, and I said, this is too much comedic gold to leave on the floor. So I became a sort of unpaid vice president in training. So we got up there. Of course, we didn't find any superstar athletes, and so created this nice dynamic where he sort of started to browbeat me. What are you doing? You can't find anyone. And it had this nice tension. And so we ended up with this film that people actually liked. When I finished my feature film, people were like, you should be really proud of yourself. You finished the film. When they watched this, they were like, that was funny. I actually enjoyed it. And it sort of opened up all these opportunities. We went to Sundance, so we would go to sporting events in character, and this was way before Sacha Baron Cohen, and people like couldn't believe it because we were wearing these garish 90s neon outfits before that was cool. And it sort of opened up all these doors. So this little $200 film that I made almost as a way just to start making stuff again did exactly what the $50,000 film that bankrupted me didn't do. It took me 5 years. So again, sometimes the small thing is actually the big thing. I think if you keep making work, Sometimes it's the thing that you don't even think is very important, is the thing that unlocks an audience or unlocks a new skill. So I think sometimes as artists, we put a lot of attention on size and scale, but as long as we're exploring new ideas and putting work out there, anything can happen. So next, this was Hunter Dawson. I was like, reality TV is blowing up. I'm gonna make a film in which I frost my tips, I tan, I get an SUV back when no one really had one. I'm gonna get a dragon print shirt that buttons up, and I'm gonna become Hunter Dawson. And I made a blanket reality TV show application video. So just me talking to camera, going through my day, I'm talking about why it'd be great for Survivor or Fear Factor, whatever. And actually, I sent the VHS tape to all these reality shows, and I'd have producers call, like, Hunter, we need to get you. I mean, I basically made a train wreck of a human being to entice them all. And I could have gone on a couple of these shows, and I almost did, and first of all, I think Fear Factor called me. They were desperate. And I just said, I actually have a huge fear of heights, first of all, so that's going to be awkward. And second of all, they get final cut. I'm not going to win. I'm not going to somehow punk them. It's their network. But I did get this into a lot of film festivals and started getting an audience. And finally, 7 years into my filmmaking career, I felt like I had some momentum. So I started exploring in other mediums. So I was invited to be part of a group show around Portland. So I decided, I didn't, again, sort of that imposter syndrome. I didn't feel like my art, it was a visual art survey show, wasn't strong enough. So I created a character, Ren, who I cast someone to play. And he was sort of one of these, almost like when Ryan McGinley, if that name rings a bell, he was a Vice magazine. He was one of their first photographers and was one of the first people that I was aware of that was sort of straddling, sort of hip culture, but also advertising, but also becoming a rising art star. And for whatever reason, this really bothered me. It felt like he was getting free cakes to eat all at once. So I sort of wanted to satirize that with Ren. And it was really also just kind of an excuse to show my own work, my own, sort of pictures of people hanging out at bars. And I even threw in some of my art that I made as an 8-year-old, arguing that, sort of once an artist, always an artist. So it was a way to sort of play with these different ideas about art and celebrity, again, and sort of making work that was sort of interesting but had these different layers to it. I would do sort of these events sort of for Ren, explaining who Ren was. This was where people who thought they looked like someone famous would talk on camera. We got a little Glenn Close, we got some Michelle Williams. These are just Portlanders that kind of came in and were part of the project. And then I think that the big game changer for me was this character, Bradley Simmons, who again was an invented character. And I got invited to be part of a festival as a filmmaker, and I said, I don't have time to make a film. I'm just going to create this character. He was sort of a dot-com refugee who had made millions down in San Francisco and had lost it, so he was only like a millionaire. And he moved up to Portland, and he loved it, but then he got yelled at in the Fred Meyer parking lot for having California license plates. And I would sort of tell my story, playing this character in a room like this, and I had a whole character I played, and then finally I'd be like, so Rick, stand up if you didn't go to 4th grade in Portland, Oregon. And of course, like the whole room would stand up. And because so many people moved from Portland, or they actually went to 4th grade in Hillsborough, and they're like, what do you want us to do? People still sitting down, you want us to all move away and crash the economy? And what I loved about it was everybody knew that some of it was made up, but they weren't sure how much. So I'd have people come up afterwards, like, I love that character. So when did you move up from California? Sort of thinking that part of the story was true. So I loved kind of creating this work that had a lot of layer to it, and people sort of had to think about. And at the same time, I was trying to sort of satirize things that I found fascinating. Sports collectors and reality television and art superstardom and dot-com culture and regional xenophobia. And back to that sort of Saturday Night Live, doing it in a way where I'm not preaching, but I'm exploring these ideas through art and kind of working with audiences to kind of talk about them and thinking about them. I think it's also important, when I've done this, I haven't done a lecture like this for a couple of years, but often it's the me show when we're artists, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that there was a whole community that I was a part of. So I met some friends, and we moved into a 5,000 square foot warehouse in North Portland, and we built bedrooms, and we built this crazy stage, and we had, rock shows and rap shows and punk rock science fairs and benefits, and it became this sort of great way just to bring people together. And if people needed a venue, we had one, and it really sort of was part of this really incredible scene that was happening in Portland when it was still really affordable, and people were moving here just to make art. And eventually we got kicked out because one of the parties got out of hand, and we moved to an old coffin factory in Old Town. And I think a theater company had the first floor, and a couple artists had space on the second floor that we were renting out, and then this third floor became we weren't really allowed to use it, but we would do this monthly lecture series. And we would have one time we did a lecture about, there was a hypnotist who came, and then David Lynch's editor was in town, so he gave a talk about David Lynch's film and sort of psychoanalysis through that. And I became sort of the go-to performer. So for that event, they wanted to also have like a dream analyst. So I played this dream analyst, and inside this warehouse, we built like this 3-room little building out of 4x8s. And so there's a waiting room, staffed with a receptionist, where you'd sign up for a dream session, and then there was the office where you would sit down on the couch, and I, Dr. Eliza Spatial, would ask you about your most memorable dream or a recent dream. And then there was a secret third room with 3 people with dream dictionaries. So as someone was describing their dream, I had a little earpiece that they couldn't see because they were over there lying down. I'd be like, okay, waterfall means fear of rejection, or whatever it was. And it was kind of incredible. I did about 30 of them over this 4-hour period, and I swear, 2 people, I said something that helped 2 people figure out a dream that they had been having their entire lives. They didn't say, but something profound happened. And again, I just loved this way that I could interact with people, and that we could create art that was about interactions and not just, sort of staring at something. And this is something we did at Reed College, where I played this English professor who lectured about boredom, and then we kind of staged this, everyone knew it was false, but almost this terrorist takeover where vans showed up and fake news people, and then I revealed myself to be the instigator of this whole thing. So I don't even think we thought this was art necessarily. I think we just were kind of, as a community of people, making stuff together and trying to create sort of interesting events and happenings. I was also at the time part of a couple writers groups, and then also an actors group. And so actually the artist Marina July got 10 of us together, and we would just meet every 2 weeks. And Storm Tharp, who I understand has lectured here, and then Carrie Brownstein, pre-Portlandia, we were all in this actors group together, and it was so cool. I think at one point even I was like, hey Miranda, should we hire or bring a real actor? And she's like, no, we just have to figure this out ourselves. And so we'd all take turns sort of being in charge of coming with these exercises. And so I feel really fortunate to have been in a time and place where I was surrounded by all these incredible, look who I'm hanging out with, look who I got to hang out with. And everyone was sort of inspiring each other and working together. And so I think it's really important that wherever you go to work, that you surround yourself with collaborators and people that inspire you. I think my wife actually recently made me make a list of people that of my friends. She's like, make a list of the vampires, and make a list of the people that inspire you. And I did, and I was like, oh, look who I'm hanging out with. Look, who are the people that always want to hang out with me? The vampires. I gotta hang out with the people that inspire me. I gotta make more work. And I think if you do this, it's more fun. They're gonna make you better, and there's more people to tell the story later on. I remember I've lost touch with Carrie. She's a little more famous these days than she used to be, but there was a big New York Times piece, and she talked about the actors group and how that was sort of, a big part of getting ready to sort of become, a full-time actress. And it was cool, Other people, I'm preaching the actors group here at Clark College. She's telling the rest of the world through the New York Times Magazine. We're all good. So this all culminated, I think, in this piece, A.C. Dixon, eBay Power Seller. So I was sort of done with working on sets. If you're interested in working in production, photo or video, it's a lot of fun, but you work really hard. you put in long days, and your schedule's really erratic. If a big movie comes to town, you're busy for the next 3 months, so it's very hard to, be in a band or do anything regularly. So I had started to sell things on eBay when the site was pretty new. So I'd go to estate sales and junk shops, garage sales, and I was selling, whatever I could find. And so I had been invited to the first, are you guys familiar with the PICA TBA Festival? This is the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art. They have a festival where they're really bringing dance and theater and performance from all over the world to Portland every fall. And it's an incredible event. And I got to be part of the first year back in 20 years ago with the Bradley Show. And I knew I wanted to come back kind of with a full-length show. Because what's cool is not only are there performers from around the world, they're curators from around the world looking for work to bring to countries that actually support work and pay artists. And so the idea was AC Days and eBay Power Seller was like one of these almost get-rich-quick schemes. Like the whole thing felt really slimy intentionally. And so it was like me, I'm talking right now, I'm like me, but with 1 cup of coffee. Even though I didn't have a cup of coffee, I'm just trying to make myself entertain you. I'm trying to get through a lot of material. This was like me on 3 cups of coffee. So I came out to Eye of the Tiger, dancing to it. And the whole premise of this is like eBay is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And you're going to leave here and you're going to sign up for an eBay account and you're going to sell some stuff on eBay. And one of the trump cards I had was I actually had auctions that I had started a week before the end of the show. And weirdly, I had these, they were like graphic designed matchbooks, like a book of matches, but from the turn of the century, like 100 years ago, and they were beautiful, and they were like the boxes that hadn't even been, toothpicks, that's what they were. They were toothpick boxes from like 100 years ago, and they were beautiful. So I found this whole, one factory was making all the toothpick boxes for the whole country, and so one would be baseball themed for South Dakota, and one of them would be Santa Claus for someplace in North Carolina. And I could put them up for $5, and there was this dentist who always swooped in at the last minute and just would go crazy. So the end of the show, before your very eyes, you saw 5 toothpick boxes go from $5 to like $100, one after another, 1 minute, and people just lost their minds. They were like, I'm signing up, So what I loved about this show is we were sort of taking what felt so sort of pedestrian and almost like an online flea market and sort of changing people's relationship to it. And there at the end, I had a little zine and people were signing up to get it autographed. Of course, I was only charging $2, but, and this show really opened things up. So this is my then girlfriend, now wife and I, who we performed together. Susan, wish she could be here, she's with the kids. Halloween's tomorrow, I think she's making a Garfield costume, homemade, props. So this is us in the Capital One Call Center in Nottingham, England, as part of the festival. So I think for this show, it was really important that we were not in theaters or sort of traditional art environments. We really wanted to go to these places where you didn't normally see art. Again, just to sort of get people to question where art can be and what art is. And so I think a lot of it's like, I don't even know if this is art. It's something. Even some of the curators that would program it were like, I don't know if it's art, but we're going to program it. So the other thing that happened with the show is, one more little life lesson here, or a little thing that I think you can and should make art out of anything, especially if other people haven't done that yet. I think sometimes we think we have to make art out of important subjects, but I think if you are interested in a world or in a subject, I think there's a lot of room to play there, and there's a lot of sort of new insights to discover. So, again, think about TV shows. You can do police, you can do hospital, you can do lawyers, but when someone comes along and says, I'm going to do a show about the mafia, but the head guy is in therapy, you're like, whoa, that's kind of interesting. That's a new way of looking at the world. That's a new way of telling a story. So the other thing that eBay Show did is got the attention of Wieden & Kennedy. Are you guys familiar? So it's the big ad agency down in Portland. They're kind of famous for really coming up with Just Do It and making every Nike commercial you've ever seen. Coca-Cola, Old Spice, they do a lot of really big advertising. So someone there saw the show, probably because I actually performed it in the atrium, because I wanted it to be in sort of a corporate environment. So they saw the eBay show and someone said, hey, we saw the show, you come in for a meeting? I said, sure, when do you want me there? And they're like, can you be here in an hour? I said, all right. So I went in and they said, we saw your show. We want to know if you'd be interested in creating a character for a Nike campaign. And here I'm in punk rock bands, and I'm like, no, are you crazy? I would never do that. So they wrote a number, a figure, an amount of money on a piece of paper, and they folded it and they pushed it across the table, and I said, okay, when do we get started? Because being an artist is hard. It was really hard. And so I'll see what happens. So I ended up creating this character for Nike ID. I created a character called Isaac Davis, and we actually did a whole presentation out of Nike where I kind of talked about the future of customization and had all these made-up stories about working with athletes. And it turned out I kind of liked that process. I kind of liked having assignments. I kind of liked having collaboration. I kind of liked making a little bit of money. And so I ended up moving to LA for a couple years, trying to break into screenwriting and acting, two of the easiest things to break into in the world, kidding, and ended up coming back after a couple years and taking a job at Wieden+Kennedy as a copywriter. And when I did, I didn't want to just not acknowledge it. So I did another show, again, for the Portland TVA, Time-Based Arts Festival, called Sellout. So I really wanted to kind of examine going from someone who would never help a Nike out to someone who was. And so this show was sort of exploring that. It was the 27 steps to selling out. So there was sort of a teaching, follow these steps aspect to it. And like the first one was like, grow up middle class, right? Because if you grow up rich, you've already sold out. If you grow up poor, it's not called selling out, it's called making it. And it kind of went from there. And so they were these sort of familiar, like kind of took you on this path. And then I needed a way to end it, and so I kind of got a little combative at the end and said, you have to sell out. This was about 12 years ago, and I said, Portland is changing, it's getting more expensive. If you want to stick around, you got to sell out. And that end really provoked people. I got some really negative criticisms. I got one death threat, and then I got some people writing very thoughtful emails to me saying, I've been thinking about this. My husband and I, we don't know if we can stay, and we're really trying to explore what Portland looks like. So again, wasn't fun to get a death threat, but it was, it was good just to have that conversation. And I just felt a responsibility not to just take this job at Wieden+Kennedy, but to kind of create some, to kind of own it and acknowledge it and try to make something from it. So there I am, again, back at Wieden+Kennedy, my new job at the time. I'm all about the PowerPoint. So I ended up spending 7 years at Wieden+Kennedy, and I kind of learned how to make ads while I was making them. And so I got to work on Old Spice. I got to help Ray Lewis ride a giant raven into outer space and blow up a planet. For Old Spice, I did some work for Starbucks. I believe I introduced cross-dressing to Starbucks. This was a holiday campaign where people would submit sort of their holiday traditions, and then I would play out all the roles. So this was a little film we made about two aunts that would try to outdo each other around the holidays baking pies. I created this campaign for Travel Oregon, which was kind of the, Wieden+Kennedy has a lot of really big corporate campaigns, but I always wanted to work on Travel Oregon. I think this was especially before we're starting to have discussions around environmental impact and travel, but at the time I felt really good about selling tourism and getting people to have vacations here and helping the economy, especially we were sort of trying to push people towards parts of Oregon that needed tourism money and needed sort of businesses to sustain. So this was sort of a big campaign where we did a big 1-minute TV commercial, and then we did a campaign or a little TV commercial for all the 7 wonders. And sort of the idea was whoever came up with the 7 wonders of the world obviously hadn't visited Oregon, because we got all these awesome things like Crater Lake and Smith Rock and the coast and on and on. And ironically, the most popular thing with these little patches we made is the idea is if you went to a couple, we would sort of surprise you if you were tagging the pictures with, you'd get a whole bunch of the little patches. People love patches. People love, sort of physical things. I also, did anyone ever hear about the WK-12? This was kind of an interesting, it experimental school inside of Wieden Kennedy. And so the idea, it was 12 students spending 12 months working together and spending 12 grand for the 1-year tuition. But it was sort of this accelerator ad school. The idea was, you could go to a portfolio school and, work on a Nike commercial maybe that no one at Nike would ever see. But here we were actually working with local nonprofits, so the Oregon Zoo and Oregon Children's Museum, and the students would work together to create campaigns. So not only were they learning how to sort of make advertising and branding, but also how to sell it to a client and then how to get the work put out there in the world. And so I got to actually help run this school for a couple years, which was really fun and really hard, especially you've got students inside an advertising agency paying to be there and obviously hoping they're going to get a job or some work out of it at the end, but it was really rewarding. And then I got to work on the brand itself, so kind of helping Wieden Kennedy tell its story. I think one of the ironies is a lot of people in communication, there's all these great design and marketing and communication companies here in Vancouver and Portland, and most of them aren't very good at actually communicating who they are and what they do. So I got to help do that for the agency, and actually they flew me to the various offices and just said, write a book that we can use to recruit people, to get press, and to get sort of CMOs interested in working with us. So I got to make a little book. But what I realized was, as much as these things were nice to have, I did not experience any of these until my 30s. Advertising isn't creatively fulfilling enough for me. And so I think the first couple years there is when I really stopped making work. And I was concentrating on, I finally had enough money, we could pay rents regularly and on time and stayed, we had kids. And so a couple years in, I was like, I'm not creatively fulfilled. I'm not making work anymore. I'm not working on my own things. And so that became this, and it was actually one of my students was like, because part of my job was always to go around to the students. What are you working on? Do you need more assignments? How are you feeling? And we had this one student who just didn't want to talk about himself. He was like, what about you? What's going on with you? I want to hear about you. And I'd be like, I've just sort of stopped. This is my life now. I help you guys. He's like, no, answer's not good enough. What are you working on? And that student kind of pushed me to start making stuff again. And so I think this is actually the talk, Cincinnati, that I gave a year. This was originally a talk I gave at Portland State called 38 Things, and again, it was sort of trying to make fun of TED Talks, where everyone's like, I've got a big idea, and I'm going to talk about the big idea for 15 minutes. I was like, I don't have any big ideas, I got 38 small ones, right? Like if you ever own a house, hire someone to mow the lawn. I'm never going to go to a party empty-handed. Stuff like that. So, and it became we ended up doing it on cable access, and it became sort of this throwback, retro, weird cable access vibe performance. And again, with the internet, all of a sudden you can put this stuff up there and people find it and see it. And so this became sort of a newer performance. I also did a show called Life Coach. This was, again, I pitched this to PICA for their TBA festival. And my pitch was, I want to make fun of life coaches. Has anyone seen a life coach or been a life coach? So I will admit, my goal was malicious. I wanted to tear down this industry. But then I went and did a 2-day life coach training, which is 2 more days than you need to be certified in Oregon to be a life coach, which is to say, any one of you could declare yourself a life coach right now. Can't declare yourself a nurse or a food handler, but you can declare yourself a life coach. And so I went and I learned, life coaching totally works. It's just about asking someone what they want out of their lives and listening hard enough and asking more questions until they just are like, yeah, I think really what I want to do is grow mushrooms, legal ones. And you're like, great, what would be the first step? And they're like, I guess I could try growing mushrooms. Well, how would you start that? Well, I guess I'd go online and buy some spores and some equipment, and then I'd try to grow them. You're like, all right, then what would be next? And I guess I'd see if I liked it. So I kind of was like, I'm going to do this straight. So I did about 25 sessions for friends and acquaintances, one-offs. I'm not looking for a long-term relationship, just 1 hour. We're going to figure some stuff out. And so for the show, this is not the show, this is just another promo picture on another bridge in a downtown nature park. But so the show was just a life coach session, but the sort of what maybe not made it art is it was in front of 100 people. So people would sign up, they would sort of audition to be life coached in front of 100 people. So I'd sort of do some business up front to kind of explain what it was. We did some exercises together, and then that person came up and just the whole audience watched as I sort of showed people what life coaching was. And because it was this art festival, I was really expecting for people to come in character and maybe create personas. But what's interesting is even the artists that came really wanted to talk about like their struggles as an artist. And it was kind of amazing, I think, to me, on the one hand, how open people were with like what's going on with them. Maybe it's reality TV, maybe it's Facebook, but people were just like not afraid to share their most intimate struggles with 100 strangers. But then also just like how much the audience wanted to help. And so I did, I think, 8 shows, and for the last 4, I actually gave the audience note cards so that they could write, because everyone could just see people were just like squirming, I know what this person should do, call on me. And so I gave them these note cards, so at the end, they could, I gave all the note cards to whoever was being coached. And I remember one of the coachees wanted another follow-up session, and he came to my little, home office at the time that was set up, the life coach lair, as my kids called it, and he took out the stack of note cards. He's like, oh yeah, I carry these everywhere I go. I read them every day, the whole stack. And I was like, whoa, I don't even know what's in there, but that's incredible. So I think for me, this was really a show about not being the center of attention. And I think some people who came to a session would be like, oh, I gotta come again. Because the show's not about, the show's about whoever's getting coached. It's like, yeah. So it was kind of cool. Some people would come to like 4 or 5 of them, because everyone was different, and somewhere, there was one that was amazing, thank goodness, that's the one the Portland Mercury came and reviewed, and there was 2 that were just train wrecks, and they just couldn't go anywhere, and were really hard for everyone involved. But I think that's kind of what made it interesting. So I got into auctioneering, so I do about, 15 auctions a year, which is, for me, just a great way to stay involved in a lot of nonprofits. I do a lot of art organizations. In fact, I was down in the faculty exhibit, and like Grant Hoddle, I don't know if I've met Grant, but I've sold his paintings several times at auction. Same goes for Damien, same goes for Ben. I've sold a lot of the teachers here's work at auctions for Disjecta and other sort of arts events. I had kids. They're not this cute anymore, sadly. But that, it took a lot of work. And then I got involved in the Moth. Are you guys familiar with the Moth? So the Moth, it's a little bit like This American Life. The Moth is just people on stage telling their stories. And you can listen on OPB Saturday nights. There is a podcast you can listen to whenever you want. And it's based out of New York. And there is sort of a touring show that comes around once a year with, the sort of the rock stars of storytelling. It's just someone getting up and telling their story. But there's also these sort of open mic nights all over the world. And so I've hosted one for the last 7 years, once a month. And anyone can come. There's a theme that's posted on themoth.org, and anyone can come and put their name in the hat to tell a story. 10 stories, each 5 minutes. And it is the best night of my life, or month, I should say, because I've done it about 80 times. But it's really, if you like people's stories, I would really suggest listening to the podcast. There's stories from all over the world. And then this is actually, if you win one, they're judged by the audience. So the winners go into the Grand Slam, which is at the Aladdin's. This was just 2 weeks ago. But I'm hosting one this Monday. The Old Church, downtown Portland. Doors at 7, show at 8. So the theme is gratitude. So people will put their name in the hat to tell a story about, being thankful for something, or who knows how they'll interpret it. So we're getting to the close here. I was doing all right at Wieden Kennedy, but I think right when I sort of felt like I had enough of this. I wasn't working as hard. I wasn't, showing up right there at 9. There was a lot of 4:30 meetings. I was unavailable before I got laid off. And so I became freelance. And so professionally, for the last 5 years, I have been working for kind of whoever calls. You're not really allowed to say that you work for certain brands down in Silicon Valley with certain celebrities, but I've worked on some big stuff. I worked with Salt and Straw for a long time, so for a couple years, I was actually writing all the flavor descriptions was part of my job. So the ice cream maker, Tyler, I'd get him on the phone. He wouldn't even let me, they wouldn't even have the ice cream ready necessarily, so I wouldn't even try the ice cream. But I would ask him 3 questions per flavor. where did the idea come from? How do you make it? What does it taste like? And he could not talk for less than 10 minutes per flavor. That's, I mean, he was like listening to a wine expert talk about, terroir. He was just so into it. And so I just take notes and then take, his 10 minutes of talking and turn it into a little 4-sentence description of the flavor. And I just did a campaign for Danner Boots. So, a lot of local companies, sometimes bigger ones, but really my job is to help companies tell their stories by day. And I like it so much, I just started a little side business with an art director, more of a graphic designer and an art director, and we started this thing. It's kind of an online class and community called Now Freelance. And so it's kind of a way for us just to share everything we've learned and help other freelancers kind of successfully navigate not how to become a copywriter or a graphic designer or an artist, but how do you navigate healthcare? How do you navigate getting clients and making a website that gets you work and all that stuff? So I've been writing lots of these articles and it's been kind of fun. I've never really started a business before, but again, you just sort of see where this career takes you and it opens up these doors that you maybe couldn't have imagined beforehand. And then lastly, I'm still making art. Back to community a couple years ago, a friend of mine, B-Frame Masters, who does a lot of storytelling events in town, got a group of us together, and she's like, I got this idea. It's going to be called The New Shit Show, and it's a variety show. So we're going to get one of the best stand-up comedians, one of the best filmmakers, one of the, a couple of the best musicians, and we'll do this show, and it's called The New Shit Show because everyone has to do never-before-performed material, which was especially tough on the comic, Amy Miller, who's since moved to LA and will probably be famous one day. She's so good. But I remember her just being like, are you kidding me? New material every month? And then also, it could be kind of a shit show. And but it was really fun, again, going back to that list of people who inspire you versus vampires, to get this group of people together. And almost the night we would get together at a bar and plan the next show was as fun as the show itself, because we were with people who inspired us, we're all making work, and it felt really good. So while I was doing that show, I was sort of the wild card, where I was usually doing some kind of weird PowerPoint. And so I did this generic sports coach speech that was like a halftime speech that really wasn't about sports. It was more about the coach and his divorce and how the team really stuck with him. And I did trends for 40-somethings and things my kids knew about when at 5 that I didn't know about until I was 21, like sushi and transgendered people and the black president, and did an ABC of things kids actually need to know. So like A is for Apple. They make the devices mom and dad pay attention to instead of you. Don't worry. One day you'll get your own Apple device and you get to ignore us. Emoji and Tech Bros. And so I kind of realized that a lot of these pieces were about kind of where I was in my life and kids and how the world has changed. And so kind of my current show that premiered this spring is called Kids These Days. And so it sort of takes storytelling and the TED Talk constructs and even a little stand-up and kind of mixes it into the show that is really drawing upon a lot of these pieces that I have that I can kind of know what to do with, and sort of trying to tell this overarching story about kind of where things are in the world and kind of taking this hour and a half to help the audience kind of contextualize just how quickly things have changed, right? The iPhone is only 12 years old, right? So it's that was a lot of fun. And so I think my kind of last point is, I think at times I felt like I was in a creative dead end or rut, or this didn't go anywhere. I made this feature film, it took me 5 years, and no one saw it other than the people in the punk rock basement who were probably coming from my friend reading the zine. But it's all really iterative, and I think as creative people, these skills build on each other, and they start to become, sort of these tools or this language we have that we can connect. So, I think one of the reasons that I like my job as a copywriter is I think it's so easy. Someone's like, oh, we want to sell this, and I can see the TV commercial in my mind. And to me, that's easy, but I have to remember, I've spent 30 years learning to think, in film and working on my writing and working on, sort of watching films and deconstructing them and making my own. So I think, you all are going to have really interesting creative careers, and I think sometimes I just to keep in mind that even if you don't end up using graphic design because you're, or becoming a graphic designer if you're a design major. Like all those skills are going to play into whatever you do creatively moving forward.